And now, ladies and gentlemen,
please fasten your seatbelts.
Welcome to PreneurCast.
Yeah, business cards being swapped, beers being drunk.
Can I say a nasty word? Can I say procrastination?
With Pete Williams and Dom Gosher.
How well did that go down?
We can talk about that entire thing in a very another rant and soapbox episode if we want to.
Visit us online at preneurmedia.tv.
Happy New Year, Mr. Dom.
Happy New Year, Mr. Peter, and welcome everyone to the first episode of PreneurCast in 2012 with me, Dom Goucher, and you, Mr. Peter Williams.
That's it. Do we call this Season 2, Episode 1, or just keep moving forward?
Don't get me started on naming things. We could be here all day.
I know it is your I don't know if it's your pet hate or your pet love.
It's my weakness, so we'll just stay away from it, shall we? We'll keep with the numbering. I'm happy with the numbering. Let's go with the numbering.
Sounds good.
Episode 36.
Big things planned for this year, for 2012. I'm very excited. We've got a lot of things in the pipe, so to speak, for listeners and other people around the Preneur community, which is very exciting.
Yeah. We dropped a few hints and a couple of big announcements in the end of year show. But I'm absolutely excited myself that the plans that we've got. We're moving forward and got big ideas for this year, and we're going to go for it in a big way, I think.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into this week's topic, I just wanted to mention, as you just did, the last show for 2011. If you haven't checked it out, it's called Dom and Pete's Favourite Things, and it covers off some of the very cool tools that we love and embrace and use on a regular basis. And did a Oprah-style show where we I gave away a bunch of these tools and books and applications, and it's not too late to try and get a copy. So if you go back and check out those or that particular episode sometime in January, I can't even say the month, January 2012, you still have an opportunity. So go check out that show. A whole bunch of stuff, really cool stuff we're giving away. So check that out. But today, we are brand new year, brand new episode, brand new topic, which is, this week, checklists. For those of you who happen to be following me on Twitter or on Facebook, you would have seen a tweet that I put out recently, which got a lot of flack slung my way. Sitting on the couch a week or so ago and with my iPad on my lap and reading Kindle. And Fleur, my beautiful fiance, said to me, what are you reading? And I replied, the Checklist Manifesto. To which she replied, what's it about? My answer was obviously checklists. And then she slung in my direction a very sarcastic, thrilling. So let's extend that and make this very, very thrilling episode all about checklists.
Hey, at least it's not New Year's resolutions.
True. Everyone is talking about New Year's resolutions. So if you're going to make a New Year's resolution, make it a checklist.
Nice one.
No, but seriously, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm agog. Somebody's written an entire book about checklists.
Yeah, and look, realistically, like a lot of books, I won't mention Seth Godin's name too loudly, but it could be actually summarised in a blog post. And, you know, he makes a very strong case over 240-odd pages or whatever the size of the book is, that checklists are something that we should all have and use. And I think the key word in that sentence is use. He's a surgeon, and he uses a lot of big words in his book, a lot of medical terms, which made it very interesting for me to read. And it uses a lot of case studies around fighter pilots and aeroplane pilots and obviously surgeons as well. And his argument is very, very well articulated that, you know, no matter what you are and no matter what you do, no matter how much training you have, whether you're a 15-year trained surgeon with 20 years experience at the end, or you're a airline pilot who has flown 20,000 hours, checklists are still things that these professions rely very, very heavily on. Obviously, in the airline industry, something I didn't really realise, that everything is about checklists. Obviously, no, they have a checklist before they actually leave the gate at the airport. But the in-flight controls and the manuals that these guys use when they're flying a plane, if any little warning light goes on, they refer to a checklist every single time and walk through that checklist, which makes you feel even more confident when you're sitting in a Boeing 747 or an A380 or something like that. But it's just interesting to see and learn and get reinforced that no matter what you're doing, that we can't rely on our memory to pick up everything, because it's very, very rare that if you sat down and wrote a checklist for a particular procedure, that when you go and do that again in 6 weeks' time, your brain will actually remember every single step, and 99 times out of 100, you'll miss one or two critical points of that checklist. And a lot of people don't like referring to checklists because it makes them feel that they're inadequate or insufficient, or a whole bunch of bigger words that he used in the book. But it got me thinking, and it was something that I was kind of already playing with to a certain extent, particularly with my outsourcers, to tie in a previous episode to give a granular level of how I'm applying this now. And we'll go into some more later on in the show. But one thing I've started to do now, particularly with some new staff members, is that we've got our work wiki and our procedural documentation that I think we've spoken about a couple of times on the show in past episodes that walk people through the actual steps of doing a process. And that's all fine and well and good. But what I'm getting the team to develop now is a simple checklist, which is the last step of that process. So what they can do is once they walk through those processes, they then just go through this checklist to tick all the boxes to make sure none of the steps are missed. And also they can use that checklist to go through when they rinse and repeat and do these tasks on a regular basis. So rather than just saying, hey, go and do this process and send out the noise reduction newsletter this week, for example, and they go and rely on memory because they've done it so many times, they have to actually use this checklist now to ensure they haven't missed a single step and make sure that the process we've outlined is correct. So that's sort of a very granular level of checklists. But that's sort of, I guess, a frame for this episode. And the Checklist Manifesto is a very interesting read if you've got a little bit of spare time. I think that summary is probably enough if you believe and happily go on and work and implement based on that sort of summary. But realistically, I think it's worth reading because he makes a very, very good argument to really internalize the need for checklists.
Cool. And it's interesting. I mean, I made a little bit of a humorous aside at the beginning, but I'm a great believer in checklists. In fact, as I said, I think I mentioned it before when we talked about Evernote. For years and years and years before I was involved in any of the things that I'm doing now, I've been writing both the equivalent of your work wiki and checklists, and I stored them originally in a thing that we used to call the Green Book, which was a loose leaf binder with those little plastic sleeves in that you just insert sheets into.
Yep.
And everything we did in my very first job, because it was a technical job and lots of high-tech wizardry going on, but most of it was process-based, we used to record everything, because one of the reasons was that some things take a long time to work out. For example, I'll give you a very good example, which is very topical, which is producing the podcast. I use Evernote to store all these things, and I use it because week on week I'll go through 100 different jobs, and the settings in different software will change. And a lot of people rely on the fact that the software remembers settings. And settings get changed, and then you're in trouble. So everything that I do has one of these checklists, including publishing the podcast. For example, if I'm going to publish the tweet when I've published the podcast, there's a URL, which is the iTunes Store URL. And I have that stored. In fact, I have a little snippet of text stored. And, I'm sure we can come back. I'm sure you might come up with this, but I'll bring it out later. But anything that has those snippets of text stored, we have ways of improving that workflow. But just to be clear that there's pretty much everything that I do, down to the specific client, I have a checklist already. Before I've even read this book, you're kind of preaching to the choir with me on this one. So have you got some kind of generic stuff that you want to talk about on this so that people can get something from it as they're going forward in 2012?
I'd say there's definitely some generic stuff that'll probably come out of this. But what I'd love to sort of talk about is, I guess, a way of actually implementing this as a workflow. And we can use an example of this. And then we can sort of give some other generic high-level sort of areas you could have checklists as a marketer or a business owner.
Cool.
And I thought a good way to sort of start this off and tie it all in is Pitch Anything, a great book by Oren Klaff. And I'm actually has been speaking to Oren recently, and we're looking at doing a couple of things together, which kind of ties back into checklists and stuff like that, actually, funnily enough, because I found that book really, really good in that it talks about how to structure a pitch. And if you've listened to the Dominique podcast by Ed Dale and Danny, you'd know that they're big believers in it and have spoken at length about the book. So we won't sort of rehash anything that they've spoken about, because they've also included interviews with Oren on their podcast. So strongly recommend people take some time and not only listen to that podcast regularly, but check out the particular episodes about Pitch Anything. But one of the core elements of the book is a structure, or a checklist, if you will, of how to actually go about doing a pitch. So there's some time constraints up front, there's frame control, there's takeaways, there's the three factors element. There's a whole bunch of stuff that he covers in the book as a way to structure a pitch. And one thing that the book didn't really have, although it has a fantastic summary at the end of how to actually start applying the Pitch Anything approach to your life, there's no real clear, specific checklist that you actually can use when actually scheduling out, structuring out, planning out a pitch. So one thing I'm working out with Oren is around that sort of stuff, and there'll be more details once that comes available. But I'm sort of, I've been trying to sort of do a lot of pitching of some different projects recently and some sales videos and stuff like that, and have sort of developed my own Pitch Anything checklist, which I'm obviously refining with Oren as we go. But what I've done is actually taken those 4 or 5 or 6 elements that he talks about and encourages you to have in your pitch and made it a checklist. But the way I've actually, done a bit of a workflow hack around this, and this will become evident very, very quickly, is I've actually started using Text Expander to create my checklists, particularly for the checklists that I'm going to really reuse when I do stuff. Like a lot of people who write sales letters or are structuring a video pitch if they're doing a video, or even a marketing piece. If you're just doing a marketing piece, not a solid pitch, but a sales or just a general marketing pitch, there should be some elements that you always have, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So what I've done is I've created some Text Expander snippets around each of these different checklists. So what I've just got / PA is the shortcut. So anytime I type in my text edit or notational velocity or anything like that, / PA space, it pops up automatically with all the key elements in order of a Pitch Anything approach. So what I can do then is I can take that structure, that framework, and fill in the gaps, so to speak, as I write my pitch and plan out my pitch. Because if I went off the top of my head and tried to just write a sales pitch using my memory, there'd be some key elements that I would have missed. So having that checklist or framework is a great starting point, but hacking it a little bit by using Text Expander has made it really, really easy for me to really make this part of my workflow and not feel like it's a hindrance or a negative about me having to use a checklist. It actually makes it easier for me to actually produce a pitch. Does that sort of make sense? Does that sort of workflow kind of give it a bit more context as well?
Absolutely. And Text Expander was what I was alluding to earlier. Just to clarify, just in case anyone has dropped in and this is their first episode, Text Expander is an awesome tool that is available on the Mac and also on iOS platforms like the iPhone and iPad, where you can store whole reams of text and call them back up and have them inserted wherever you're typing right now, just by typing a few special characters that you define. And Pete's / PA is an example. You pick an unusual string of characters that you wouldn't otherwise type, and then Text Expander can see that when you type it, and it replaces those characters with stuff that you might want to use. Now, a lot of people use Text Expander to do things like I use it to insert today's date, for example, both with dashes in between the day, month, and year, and also without them if I'm using it in a file name. But you can really go to town with a text expander. And Pete, your example is brilliant, and it's something that I've just started doing recently as well, where you can store anything that you want to make reference to, or anything that you use regularly as a template. You don't just have to store little words and things in there. You can store anything at all. So using it to keep your checklists for things like, as you say, the pitch anything. And I actually noticed, as you did, that there wasn't really a one page that you could go to in the book that had it summarized in. So if there's anything like that you've got, and I've started doing this myself, if there's processes or steps that you've got, you could literally just drop them all into Text Expander. Other people, have them filed in Evernote. They have them in Notational Velocity or whatever their other text editors are. But actually storing them in Evernote, in Text Expander, is brilliant, because wherever you are, if you use one machine regularly, or you have your iPad with you, which you can synchronize your text snippets, by the way, then you literally just type, in any kind of text area, //PA, as you say, and you've got the steps of the pitch anything process, which is a great framework to start when you're writing stuff. And I used to use, by the way, John Carlton's 4-step guide before I read Pitch Anything, but now I'm starting to work with the Pitch Anything one. So again, if you're into that kind of thing, John Carlton has lots of guidelines in his various products. You could store those in Text Expander, or just write them down somewhere useful to refer to. But it's a great real-world example of a checklist, definitely.
Yeah, and I think the way I think people should look at this is, rather than maybe using the term checklist, think about it as a framework. So, another framework that Frank Kern talks about in his video black box product, when he comes to teaching people how to actually structure a video, he says there's 4 steps. Obviously, I guess an introduction is sort of probably not really a step, but there's introduction. Then there's pattern interrupt, and he really suggests that what you should try and do at the start of a video is do a pattern interrupt and interrupt someone's pattern, so they don't sit there expecting to get sold. They get shaken up a little bit. Then it's content delivery, which is the key element of the video, and then always have a call to action at the end. So that's his 3-step framework system for creating a video. Now, there's, a whole bunch of different frameworks available to you. Sales copywriting. Maybe you're writing an email that becomes an attachment to a proposal or a quote that you're giving out for your roof tiling business. Or maybe you are a running coach or a triathlon coach or a marketing coach, and you want to actually sit down and speak to someone for a very first consultation with them. You should have a checklist to work through. When we have our 7 Levers Mastermind calls, particularly moving forward as we grow that and re-release that to a new group of members to help grow and double their profits, we're going to have a lot more checklists in place, not only for them, but also for Dom and I, as we conduct the weekly calls that we'll go through with everybody. There's going to be a lot more structure and some checklists in there, so everyone clearly knows what they're getting. We don't miss key elements each week, because on a couple of the calls we had last year, not only do we have great response to everybody, but I think certain weeks we skipped over some stuff I would have liked to include it, and just given some extra value there, which we missed out on. I think everyone loved it, but there's obviously having that structure could be very, very helpful to go through. So I think it's just really key for people to look at their business and work out all the different elements and processes that they work through, and create some frameworks and checklists around everything they do. Maybe you've got, this is what we do in the telco business and have done so for a while, is that, when someone is out there installing a phone system, there's actually a checklist, a list of all the things that need to be done and trained with a client. So before the technicians later leave site, they have a checklist that they tick off in terms of, yes, we've trained them on all these elements, and get the client to sign it as well, just to confirm that nothing's been missed. It looks more professional. It ensures the clients get the same service every single time. So when we have a client call up, questioning, querying, wanting additional support, our internal office staff know exactly what's been given the very first time a technician was out on site. So it's that consistency which is really important too. And that's the real key that they talk about in the checklist manifesto, is that what a checklist does, it ensures consistency. And consistency is such a powerful little tool, I guess you could refer to it as, when used on a regular, disciplined basis in a business.
Yeah, I do think it's important that there is a degree of negativity, I think, in certain places with the word checklist. And certainly if you've worked in a service industry, you might have come across checklists before and been on the kind of the receiving end of them. And you might have a bit of a downer on them. But it is important that you look at this from the perspective, as Pete, as you said, that it can be a framework. There's lots of different ways you can use this concept. One is as a framework. So the example of, as you said, Pitch Anything or Frank Kern's video Black Box. When you're sitting down to do a job, say a creative job, or a job that needs to follow a certain pattern, then having that pattern available for reference as a framework will guide you and give you kind of inspiration and focus you on the steps you need to take. As a repetitive task, got assistance, for example, as you put, with your installations, then it's important to have these physical, actual checklists, things that people tick off and say, yes, I've done that, because then you have, as you say in a business, consistency, and you also have that thing where one part of your business can rely on another part of your business without physical communication having to happen. If your support team know that your engineers go through this checklist and they have that checklist, they can know your client has at least been made aware of these aspects of the product. So it's incredibly valuable from an efficiency and productivity and workflow point of view as well. But also it can work well as a reminder. For example, if you have telephone operators or salespeople, this is something we talk to people about on the mastermind, one of our mastermind calls, when we were suggesting that people who wanted to increase the number of subscribers to their mailing list, because the dominant communication was actually on telephone, we suggested that they had a telephone operator checklist. And part of that checklist was, have you asked the client if they are on your mailing list? It's just something to have in front of people to remind them to check something. And it's as important to that business that somebody makes that check as it is to somebody making sure that the overhead light on the dashboard is off on the plane before they take off, as it were. Whatever is critical to your business, whether it's highly repetitive and needs to be done right every time, or whether it's something that you don't do very often, but when you do it, you need to follow a sequence of steps, both those things are applicable. And that's, I think this is a great thing to start the year with, for that reason. Because if you start 2012 looking at your business and looking at the ways that you can make notes of these frameworks, these steps and processes that you go through, and use it. Again, Pete, a brilliant example that you had there with the outsourcing. A lot of people have taken on board our point about work wikis, or my idea of the green book, storing your processes, step-by-step processes, in Evernote or in the online wikis, or however it works for you. But that extra step of then summarizing that as a checklist at the end is a fantastic plus to that process, because people who do this regularly don't really read those instructions time and time again, because they're quite long-winded and detailed, because they were written for the person doing it the first time. When you've done it 10 times, what you want is the essence of the process, a checklist, to make sure that you've done all the steps. And that, as a pair, the original work wiki and that checklist is a very powerful addition to any business.
Oh, absolutely. And to sort of, I guess, take that in more of an analog sense as well, is that, in a similar sort of way to how we use it with our technicians on site, imagine if you are a contractor and you're doing some sort of labour-intensive sort of work, whether it's roof tiling or you're building a pergola for someone or something like that. If you actually went out as part of that pre-sales process with an actual checklist and you're doing like a 4-point safety check or something like that, it just reinforces to your prospect that you know what you're doing. You're also covering your own butt to make sure you haven't forgotten anything, because how many times have you gone and quoted on a job or something like that and you've forgotten an element and then you're stuck taking a bit of a loss or eating into some of your margin because you missed a key step when you were doing the quoting. So not only does it actually save your own butt, it actually really reinforces the professionalism that you give to a client, which obviously helps increase your conversions as well. So there's so many different ways you can use checklists in a business, beyond just helping you remember, but also to actually increase the value you give and obviously any value that you lose because you've missed steps and things like that. And I think the really good thing that I took away from the Checklist Manifesto as a book was just a very solid argument that he made time and time and time again through case studies and examples that we can't rely on our memory, and it's not a shot to our ego or anything like that to start relying on checklists. The smartest and richest people in the world do this. If you look at Warren Buffett and any sort of stock market investor or even real estate investing, that I remember when I look back when I was working with Steve McKnight doing real estate investing, he was very much about checklists. Is that he had a 4 or 5 point checklist that every property had to tick these boxes, otherwise he'd move on. It helped him eliminate stuff very, very quickly, which was another really key distinction that he speaks about when he talks about checklists, particularly from an investing perspective, that having a checklist actually helps you eliminate the losers even faster. You just go through and go, yep. If it doesn't match all 5 key elements that you need, move on to the next one and start assessing another particular deal. And Warren Buffett does this, and all the key stock traders and things like that, they get their emotion out of the way by using checklists. So it actually really it helps them become better at what they're doing because they're doing it. So it's actually a little counterintuitive, but there's so many different reasons and arguments that can be backed up by lots and lots of data that really reinforce why we should all be using checklists for everything we do.
And a really good example, I like there are 2 things in that I really like. One of them is about this idea that the removing the emotion is really important. It's something actually that Ed Dale and the challenge team talked about year on year. When you go through the challenge, the idea behind a challenge is to identify a business or marketing opportunity online. And the thing that they stress is to not get emotional, not get involved in the topic before you've evaluated it and made sure it's worth the effort. And so that's another great example, just like with the real estate or the investment market, of having a checklist where if the opportunity doesn't meet these requirements, just get rid of it and use that checklist as your anchor, your way to say, no, I'm not going to follow that one down. It doesn't meet these requirements. I'm getting rid of it. I'm not following it up. I'm not using the energy. So that's a great way to do it, and really, really useful, as long as you've obviously identified those criteria first. Which is something that needs a bit of time spending. And the other thing is this idea of, as you say, don't be ashamed that your memory, you're enhancing or backing up your memory. That your memory only really works by repetition. And so if you don't do something all day, every day, it doesn't matter what it is, you won't remember it. You'll be a very unusual person if you do. The various books that I've read on memory and memory forming, including Moonwalking with Einstein, that great book that you recommended, talks very much about this process. And you just don't have a hope of remembering everything that has to do with your job. And by the way, if you ever do get to the point where you're outsourcing, then really you shouldn't be remembering it anyway. Somebody else should be doing it for you. You should just have a checklist to make sure they've done it. So I use checklists all the time. People think that I am some great mine of information, that I remember all these great facts and details about various things. But there will come a day when I'm doing a process, and video and media production is one of those industries that requires a lot of numbers and processes and settings and bits of software and places to put files, and you can just multiply that and start multiplying it by orders of magnitude as soon as you start working for the clients. And I have to remember all this stuff. And years ago, I just stopped trying. I just remember the important stuff. And I think it was Einstein, actually, who said, I don't need to remember that. I have books with that in. So, yeah, I write it down. I have whole reams of these things stored in Evernote now. Every time I get a new client and they want me to put a file in a particular place, or it requires a certain title sequence, or I got their music from a certain place, or it all goes in a file somewhere. And there are checklists, there are just memory aids in there, but these checklists are everywhere for me. So it's not something to be ashamed of. But I'd quite like to just bring this down to basics, if that's all right. I'd like to talk a little bit about how people can implement these checklists. First of all, by getting technology out of the way, and then let's scale it up and come up with some kind of technology aids. Is that all right?
All right, let's do it. Bring it on.
I mean, my first point, your checklist for people going on site for a client, and the professionalism that brings. I love that. I think that's a great thing to do. If you turn up, whoever you are, whether you're a roofer, a plumber, any kind of tradesman, if you turn up with a checklist, I think that would look awesome. And you can do that so easily. You don't need to go to the local printers or anything. You literally just start Microsoft Word and put a big bold heading at the top of the page, put some new blank lines, and put some more headings with the different things you want to make sure you've covered. That's it. Cover a sheet of A4 with that. If you want to get clever, you can draw boxes in Microsoft Word. Bang, bang, bang. And then give it a sensible name. I don't want to naming, but I'm not going to go too far. Give it a sensible name that'll remind you that it's a worksheet or a checklist or a framework, and store it somewhere in a safe, dedicated folder somewhere on your computer. And then when you're going to see a client, just hit print. That's it. Just hit print. And just one at a time, print them out, put them on your clipboard, and set off to the client. That's it. Oh, here's a really big tip. If you actually have got something that needs a diagram, or that you do need to draw something on the page, some people overlook this, and this is a really, really big one. Use PowerPoint, or my personal favourite, because it is actually more flexible on the Mac, Keynote. Anything that requires actual layout, positioning things precisely on a page for like one-page checklists or documents, I actually use Keynote. It's awesome. You can draw in it. You've got all the text controls and formatting that you've got in Word, but it doesn't argue with you about where you put it on the page. This
is my prediction. I'm going to interrupt for 2 seconds. This is my prediction for 2012. Keynote is going to be your new e-myth.
There was a slight wowing noise as the cat came out of the bag there.
Anyway,
we'll come. You're well spotted, sir. Well spotted. Keynote is going to be mentioned quite a few times this year, definitely. But no, that's that is a ninja tip for you on a low tech basis. You can get a really good looking checklist to go out to clients with just by using Microsoft Word. If you want it to look a little bit more elaborate and have a little bit more presentation to it, drawing boxes and things, then try using something like PowerPoint or Keynote to get that layout. And that's the first thing. But the extra step there, and probably the more important one, and this is, I think, ironically, the one that will fail most people. So this is kind of going back a little bit to one of our podcasts about you learning to use the tools you've got. I really encourage everybody this year to learn to use the tools you've got. Specifically, learn to file things properly on your computer, because a lot of what we're going to talk about is, in terms of implementing checklists and frameworks, is going to be about recording this information, putting it somewhere where you know it is, and then being able to retrieve it quickly and efficiently so it's actually of use to you. All right? So the real tip there is not just use Microsoft Word, but to name the document with something that the actual file name, when you look at it in the file explorer or finder or whatever computer or system you're using, make sure that you can find it again. Put it in a folder with a sensible name, yeah? But make sure you can actually get to it, because you could write 1,000 checklists, but if you can't get them back or can't remember where you put them, then you may as well not be bothered.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to take this to the nth degree and give someone the other end of the scale of how you can make this work. And sort of one way you could really reinforce this to make sure you don't forget your clipboard and don't forget to print them out is when you're actually going to create the entry in your digital calendar of the appointment that you've got next Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. As well as putting in the client and the location, if you have a text expander snippet with your on-site pitch or on-site consultation checklist, as you're actually putting in that diary entry, if you just hit a couple of keys that you've made up, that automatically pops in the 3 or 4 things you need to have before you leave your office to go and do that consultation. It might be your clipboard, the printout, some flyers, an example, your texture board if you've got different material that you deal with, whatever it might be. And as you actually go and create that agenda in your calendar, put in that snippet to give you that checklist. And as you walk out the door, when your phone goes beep beep or your computer screen goes beep beep with that meeting, you can quickly click on that and drill into the actual notes associated with that actual entry that give you the things you need to take. So it's a checklist for your checklist. And it's how you can sort of take it to the nth degree and be really granular with it and use something like Text Expander to make all that automate. I know a lot of people who do this with their OmniFocus. So as they're putting in particular tasks into OmniFocus, no matter what it is, they've got these little snippet checklists that they actually add into the notes automatically that gives them the reminder of the checklist they need to do when they're doing that particular activity, which is really, really key.
Yeah, to just low-tech that one before I really high-tech it, that checklist of things to take on a client visit is easily created in a Word document, printed out and stuck in your briefcase or your work bag or whatever. And those things, by the way, it might be worth even laminating. It's like, make sure you've got these when you go on a client visit. Yeah, print it out. Get it laminated at the local copy shop or even a cheap laminator from the local supermarket, because you can get them now. Stick it in your bag, and then before you leave, just pull it out, look at it. Have I got a business card? Have I got a quote form? Have I got this, that, and the other? As you say, samples, swatch boards, that kind of thing. Yep, good. Put it back and go. Yes, we can go super high tech, and I love the idea of putting the actual all the information you need, including the checklist, in the reminder in your calendar. But we can low-tech it too. Going super high-tech and calling again back to another episode. You remember the book Creating Flow with OmniFocus?
Absolutely.
With Karosh Dinny. Hi, Karosh. Thanks for the emails. Great to chat to you. We talked about that book. In that book, he actually shows a method for storing checklists in OmniFocus that appear that you can use and reuse and copy back in as a task and as a project and a series of steps to perform a task, which is really, really powerful. Now, obviously, we're talking about, like Pete talks about Text Expander, I'm talking about OmniFocus. These are very specific tools. But what I'm trying to get across by keep going back to the low tech is you can implement what we're talking about with pieces of paper. You can implement it with everyday tools that everybody's got. You can find tools on your computer or on your iPad or your iPhone or your Android device that will help you do this. But we have specific examples that work for us, like OmniFocus. I use this by the way, this idea of templated projects in OmniFocus. Ever since I saw it in Creating Flow with OmniFocus. Because OmniFocus is again, for people who are just joining us, OmniFocus is a task management tool that's based around the getting things done methodology.
Which is a checklist and a framework in its own right.
Which is another checklist and another framework, and is definitely something that you could summarize and have in a book a little booklet or online stored somewhere to remind you to follow the steps on the different days. So definitely. But OmniFocus is a very, very powerful kind of project and task manager and reminder and all kinds of things. And it's very, very powerful, but it's actually made more powerful with tips like the ones in Karash's book, because suddenly these things like these checklists to set up a project, it's like we're talking about Text Expander, where when we make a calendar entry, we're very quickly adding that checklist. If you can't quickly and easily do something, like if you can't quickly and easily find your checklist, then you stop using it. If there isn't flow, if it isn't easy to do, you stop doing it. So a lot of this is about, as I said, making sure you can do it easily, making sure you can find these checklists, making sure they're easy to follow. And Karash's tip really enhanced my use of OmniFocus, because instead of every time I do, let's say, a podcast episode, there are a certain number of things I need to do. I don't do them all at once. I don't do them even the same day sometimes. And so it's easy to forget. So I use OmniFocus to remind me of the steps. But there are something like 12 steps to publish an episode. If I had to make an entry called Podcast Episode 36, and then followed by individually writing out the 12 steps to follow, just so that something reminded me tomorrow and I could tick a box, I really wouldn't do it. And I would lose out for that. But by having these copyable projects, these kind of templated projects with the tasks and steps already written in, I just bang, copy paste. And I've got PreneurCast036 is ready to go as a task in OmniFocus. It's being managed and tracked. So that's using the more advanced technologies to enhance this. But just don't lose track of the principle. And this is my 2012, okay? My 2012 is the idea of really trying to help people with understanding the principle and then the application. Because a lot of people go out there and go, hey, you can use this technology, go and use that. And it's great to be told what to use sometimes when there's so many options. But if you don't really understand the base principles of what you're doing, I think you lack something in the implementation. So really, Pete, you're going to sum this up better than me, but for me, checklists and frameworks are an incredibly powerful tool in any business, whether it is a tradesperson with their checklists of getting information from a client, all the way up to, as you said, the summary checklists at the end to match up with your workwiki entry for your outsourcing team to make sure they've done the job properly. There's a place for checklists and frameworks in every business, and they are so powerful, and they can free up so much space in your head, because you no longer have to remember all these facts and figures and go through the stress of trying to remember them and dredge them up from the depths of your memory. You know they're in a work wiki, you know they're in your green book, you know they're in Evernote, you know they're in a text file somewhere, you know they're in that Word document that's in your customer contacts folder, and you just have to press print, and away you go. So I think this is a great start to 2012.
Couldn't agree more, mate. Couldn't agree more. Now, I'm going to leave everybody with a medium tech idea and then give you an action point to actually work on. I think that's something I really want to implement in our checklist for the podcast episodes moving forward, is actually give you guys clear action steps to take at the end of every episode to make sure you kind of, not only just listen and enjoy the episode, you actually implement and at least take some sort of step forward. So the medium tech idea is actually applying a couple of things that we've spoken about when it comes to checklists. So maybe you've got PowerPoint or Keynote, and you've got a number of different frameworks and checklists in your business. If you're an online marketer, it might be how to actually upload and promote a new blog post. Maybe it's a checklist or a framework for creating a sales video. Maybe it's a checklist before you leave the office to go on a consulting visit. Maybe it's a checklist for when a new product comes into your inventory, or whatever it might be. Is go on to Keynote or PowerPoint and actually create basically a desktop wallpaper out of all these checklists. So you might have 4 or 5 mini checklists created graphically very, very basic. You don't have to go and spend money doing it, but just a very, very graphically clear wallpaper that you can then upload onto the back of your laptop or your desktop computer that has all your checklists right there. So all you have to do is minimize your window to see the checklist and get that reference straight away. And that way it's going to be front of mind because it's in front of your eyes. So that's sort of a medium tech idea. So before we leave, I want to give you this action point. And my action point for this particular episode when it comes to checklists is just pick one thing in your business that you do on a regular basis, be it blog posts and marketing. Maybe it is doing pitches and running sales letters, and you're going to actually create and review a checklist. Grab some sort of book or course or system that you actually use and write that checklist out. Make a text expander snippet about it if you want to go to the nth degree, or just write it out and stick it on the wall next to your desk and just see what happens over the next 7 to 10 working days when you actually refer to this checklist. See how much more productive you are, how much further you get, and how much more confidence you feel in the process because you've actually given yourself freedom to actually be creative and not remember the structure around that. So that's your action point for this week. And a part B to that is to go back and listen to the episode at the end of 2011, the Pete and Dom's Favourite Thing episode, and invest 3 or 4 minutes, take some action around that particular episode, and you'll have a chance to win some very, very cool prizes from mine and Dom's Favourite Things list. So that's it. Thank you for joining us throughout 2011, and more importantly, thanks for taking the journey with us for the rest of this year as well. We look forward to speaking to you on a weekly basis as we have last year, and make the second year of PreneurCast even bigger and better.
Absolutely. I'd just like to say again, thank you everybody for a great 2011. We really enjoyed all your feedback and input into the program, and we've taken a lot of that on board, and we're changing what we're doing to help and support you in your business, and we want to continue doing that in 2012. So if you found this episode useful, or you found any of the episodes useful, please do pop on to iTunes and drop us some feedback. And as Pete pointed out in episode 35, that's part of one of the ways you can enter to win our favourite things from 2011. But do pop us some feedback either on iTunes or on preneurmedia.tv, the online website home of this podcast, or drop us an email at support@preneurgroup.com. Just get in touch, drop us a line, let us know what you want to hear from us, and let us know if you like this new format of the action point and the medium tech solution idea at the end. But for now, I think that'll do us for the first show of 2012. See you next week.
Ciao.
You've been enjoying another fine episode of PreneurCast with Pete Williams and Dom Gosher. Make sure to hang out with the boys online at preneurmedia.tv or drop them a line via PreneurCast@preneurgroup.com.